Good to go, Madam Chair.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the November meeting of the Environmental Quality Board, or EQB. This is Nancy Daubenberger. I'm the Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Transportation and honored to serve as chair of the EQB. And I'm sorry I am not able to be there in the room with whoever was able to make it today. But also I need to let you know I need to jump off the meeting at about 2:30 today. I regret that. And I'm hoping my co-chair, Nick Martin, can take over at that point. But with that, why don't we go ahead and have the Executive Director, Catherine Nuschler, call the roll. Go ahead, Director Nuschler.
All right, thank you, Chair. Commissioner Arnold. Board Member Bakken.
Present.
Board Member Bauerkemper.
Present.
Board Member Brands. Commissioner Cunningham, I don't believe could join us. Chair Daubenberger.
Here.
Commissioner Gronball. Board Member Hintz. Chair Holman.
I am here.
Excellent. Board Member Katzenberger.
Here.
All right, Commissioner Kessler could not join us, but we have Rachel Gennady with us from PCA. Thank you, Rachel. Board Member Martin.
Yes, here.
Commissioner Barilek, I don't believe could join us. Board Member Nelson.
Here.
Commissioner Peterson, don't believe he could join us either. Board Member Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Stroman.
Here.
Is Peter Lindstrom here? All right, I'm going to go back through just to make sure. I think Commissioner Gronball joined us.
Yes, here.
Did we have Commissioner Arnold? Or Board Member Brands? Or Board Member Hintz? All right. Did I miss anyone? All right, Chair, we have 10 members here today, so our quorum is 9, so I think we're set.
Great. Thanks, everyone. All right, then next on the agenda is the approval of the consent agenda. And that is the meeting minutes from the October 15th, 2025 EQB meeting. That's in your packet, page 5. And the preliminary agenda for this meeting today, November 19th, 2025. And that is in your packet on page 3. So with that, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Chair Daubenberger. Sorry, I did want to note there wasn't an updated set of minutes sent out. I think we inadvertently thought that Commissioner Peterson was in 2 places at once, so we updated that. So there were minutes that were sent out yesterday.
Thank you for that note on that. So yes, it is then needs to be approved as part of a consent agenda first before we approve the consent agenda, or do we just approve that knowing that those minutes are those newly sent out minutes are a part of that?
I think if you just noted is the minutes as sent out on the corrected minutes as set out on Tuesday, that should be fine.
All right. So could I have a motion to approve the consent agenda with the minutes that were sent out yesterday, which is Tuesday, November 18th of 2025?
Member Katzenberger, so moved.
Thank you, Member Katzenberger. Second?
I'll second, Member Martin.
Thank you, Member Martin. Right. Any discussion on the motion? Not hearing any. I think we can go ahead and call the roll. Go ahead, Director Nusha. Please call the roll.
All right. For approval of the consent agenda, Commissioner Arnold. Board Member Bakken.
Support.
Board Member Bauerkemper.
Yes.
Board Member Brands. Commissioner Cunningham is not with us. Chair Daubenberger.
Yes.
Commissioner Gronball.
Yes.
Board Member Hintz. Not with us. Chair Holman.
Aye.
Member Katzenberger.
Yes.
Commissioner Kessler is not with us. Board Member Martin.
Yes.
Commissioner Verilick, not with us. Board Member Nelson.
Yes.
Commissioner Peterson is not with us. Board Member Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Stroman.
Aye.
Commissioner Arnold, do you want to vote on the consent agenda?
Yes.
Yes, I do want to vote, and yes, I.
Aye.
Aye. All right, that is 11 ayes.
Great. The motion carries and the minutes, the updated minutes that were sent out yesterday, as well as the agenda for today are adopted. So now I'll turn it over to Executive Director Catherine Nuschler for the ED report. Go ahead, Catherine.
Thank you, Chair Daubenberger. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. I know it's a little gray outside, so I'm kind of glad we're in a room without windows, so we don't know. But I'm glad you're all here, whether you're here in person or online. Our usual logistic reminders, the meeting is being recorded. And then just a reminder for those of you online that the chat is open and it's visible to everyone, but we do not keep that as part of the meeting records. So please just use it for logistical issues. If you want to make a public comment, raise your hand. You could note in the chat, I would like to comment. Don't put your comment in the chat, but you could let us know. And you can always email us comments, though the email address is not complete on the slide, so don't use that one. Board members, obviously, we've got a couple of decision items today and then an information item. We always welcome your questions and feedback, so please use the raise hand function or jump in during discussions. Board members, you should be able to mute and unmute yourself if you're online. Hopefully we have a good camera set up today so you can catch people in the room too when they have questions or things to say. And if you're online, helpful to have your camera on when you're speaking. So there are going to be multiple opportunities for comment. All three of our agenda items today: the pollinator report, the update on our continuous improvement process, and then on the informational agenda item related to data centers. Again, when we get there, please use the raise hand button in Teams to indicate that you want to make a comment. If you're in the room, hopefully you indicated that when you signed in on the sign-in sheet, and then we'll cue you at relevant points in the agenda. If you are online, it might take a minute for the system to recognize that you can unmute, so just be patient. Right, so the comment procedures are on the packet. Yes, all right, just moving on to the short director's report. I will note that several of our public member board appointments, our terms expire in early 2026. We actually have 5 of our public members who have expiring terms. Applications for those seats, whether new applications or from board members who are looking to continue on, are open via the Secretary of State's board and commission pages. So there's a map of the state with the districts that are open and a QR code and some links if folks are interested in making an application. We would ask folks to do that early, probably. I think it will be spring by when our appointments are made. So preferably by February would be a great time to apply. A brief update on the energy infrastructure rule that we talked about in September, I believe. The comment period for that rule, which is conforming the EQB's rules with the new Energy Infrastructure Permitting Act, closed on November 14th. We had just 2 relatively short or relatively simple comments on that rule, and we'll be working to finalize that, make some decisions about responding to those comments, and then bring the rule to the board for adoption probably in January. So that is moving forward. For our next few meetings, we are going to have an ARIS meeting in December. Commissioner Stroman and I are talking about the agenda. I think there will be a lot of updates on our environmental review work, some of the rulemaking and all the various things the team has been working on next month in December. And we are likely to have several board decision items in January and February. So just for folks who's planning, I think it's January 21st is our January meeting. Don't remember February, but there will be decision items. So we hope that you will all be able to make it and hear about those and weigh in on the decisions. And I think that is all I have as a report, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you, Executive Director Nuschler. So are there any questions for Catherine from board members on the report? Raise your hand or just jump in. I don't think I'm seeing any questions, but let me know if I'm missing something. Nope. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Well, that moves us on to item number 4 on our agenda, and that's the Annual Pollinator Report, acceptance by the board. So our first agenda item is approval of this Annual Pollinator Report. And our presenters are Rebecca Gutierrez Moreno. She's our State Pollinator Coordinator with EQB, and Christina Locke, our Pollinator Conservation Coordinator with the DNR. Welcome, Rebecca and Christina.
Thank you, Chair. I feel like I need to look at the screen to thank you, but the camera is good. Okay. Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members of the board and members of the public. My name is Rebecca Gutierrez Moreno, and I am the State Pollinator Coordinator with the Environmental Quality Board. And I'm joined here today by my colleague, Christina Locke from the Department of Natural Resources. She is the Pollinator Conservation Coordinator. And today we're here representing the Interagency Pollinator Protection Team to talk about the 2025 Minnesota State Agency Pollinator Report for board consideration. And I can, let's go with my own slide. I think not. Could you go?
Working so hard.
Thank you. It always works in the tech test. Okay. So today, in this presentation, we will talk about what are the board actions for today. We will provide some background on the work that we do to protect pollinators in Minnesota. Then we will go into the contents of this year's report. We'll talk about our next steps, and then we will have time for some questions and discussion.
Here it comes. No.
Thank you. So today the board will hear the presentation of the 2025 Pollinator Report, and then the board will consider approving a resolution to accept this report.
It works. It just is a little delayed.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. We're going to start from the beginning. Why do we care about pollinators? And I think most of the people here in this room, and hopefully in the public too, we all know that pollinators are crucial for our survival, for the survival of all living things, because they are responsible for the reproduction of a lot of flowering plants. It's calculated about 87% of all flowering plants in the world are pollinated by another animal organisms, and they're also crucial for food systems, so for our food security. They're also really important for our resilience against climate change, and they're also important for our economy. And just to show here those cool animals, everything is interconnected, and pollinators are important to making that happen. Unfortunately, pollinators are in trouble. And we know that there are certain factors like the loss and fragmentation of their habitat, pesticide exposure, disease and parasites, and also climate change that affect them, that are affecting them. And unfortunately, those factors do not act in isolation, but they can interact with each other and increase their negative effects to pollinators. And, pollinator conservation is complex because we're not only talking about one single species that we want to protect and what we want to conserve, but we're talking about a wide variety and diversity of insects and animals that are pollinators and that we want to protect. And just to give you an example, recent surveys have told us that just in Minnesota, we have more than 500 species of bees. And that's only bees. We are still working to figure out about butterflies, about beetles, about mosquitoes, and all these other insects that are also pollinators. So just to paint a picture of what this work entails. And Minnesota's taken action to protect pollinators. Executive Order 1928 directs the Environmental Quality Board to convene and lead an interagency team for pollinator protection. This executive order also sets the goals that we're working towards and establishes our desired outcome and directs this interagency team to bring a report every year to the board before December 1st. It's important to note that this interagency team, in my personal perspective, is really awesome. Is staff comprised of staff that are subject matter experts from 10 state agencies that are listed here. And we work together to strategize, to think about policies, programs, to think about how we can increase each other's capacity and how we can collaborate to protect pollinators in our state. So talking about our goals, we have 3 goals. Number 1 is that lands in Minnesota support pollinators. And our key outcome here is that there will be more food resources, nesting, and overwintering sites for pollinators. Our second goal is that Minnesotans will use pesticides judiciously and only when necessary, with a key outcome of reducing impacts to pollinators from pesticides through the use of integrated pest management. And our third goal is that Minnesotans care and value and understand pollinators, with a key outcome of more action through community commitments. By working toward progress on these goals, we want to achieve our main desired outcome of healthy, diverse pollinator populations in Minnesota that sustain and enhance our economy and our way of life. So in 2020, from 2022 to 2023, the interagency team developed an action framework with a purpose to guide the strategic alignment of resources, policies, and programs to help Minnesota's pollinators. So the final action framework was published in our 2023 Pollinator Report. You can find it on EQB's website if you want to check it out. And then last year, 2024, we worked together to prioritize the actions in that action framework so that we could figure out how to start implementing what things were already in progress and how we can really work together towards that. And we started that implementation as well. And this year, the team worked to figure out how to report that progress. So we developed a matrix that my colleague here will discuss, because that is the main bulk of the report this year. This matrix of the implementation progress of the action framework. And we want to use this matrix tool together with the scorecards that we will update every 3 years to use them as tools for reporting and streamline our reporting to the board, but also to use them as accountability tools toward each other and towards the public as well. And I'm going to give the virtual mic to my colleague, Matt, to talk about the contents of this year's report.
Thank you, Rebecca. So the structure of the report is listed here. These are the sections of the report. We start with the charge of our interagency team and an introduction. And I will note that as a group, we have really focused, because they are annual reports, we've really focused on making the front matter of these reports very concise, very short, so that we can get to the meat of what's new this year. And what's new this year is introduced in the overview section. It's the implementation matrix that Rebecca mentioned. But that meat of that matrix is actually in the appendix. So just like in 2023, when that action framework was in an appendix, and that was the meat of that report, the same thing here, except now it's the implementation matrix. We also have a section for highlights submitted by each agency of what they really were proud of during this year that we accomplished as far as pollinator conservation goes. We also highlight 3 stories of success that goes into more depth about specific partnerships or programs that we wanted to highlight this year. And then we finish with a very short, again, call to action, just letting all Minnesotans know that they have a role in pollinator protection in the state. It's not just the agencies that are putting this report together. So I'll go a little bit deeper into the implementation matrix and the structure of that. The first thing you may notice in the appendix is that there are a whole lot of tables. And the reason there are a whole lot of tables is that each table corresponds to a subcategory in the action framework. So whereas the action framework in that 2023 report had the goals and the goal category and the goal subcategory, and then the actions falling within those subcategories, here we're starting with the actions, and then we're identifying specific projects led by certain agencies and going from there. So if we put these 2 tables together, they'd be gigantic. So this is our way of separating them out so that they're manageable. So one table for each subcategory. And then so we identify the agency in charge of that project and what their role is, whether that's a support role or an encourage role where another entity or partner is actually the lead of that project, or if it's the agency itself leading that project. There's also a column for partners that we're working on for these projects, and then the status of the project. So whether the project is completed, in progress, on hold for now. And then we have a 4th category for sustained effort, and that is for projects that don't have a discrete start and end date, but are really ongoing and kind of baked into the core missions of our agencies, which we certainly don't want to leave off of these tables because those are important too. Here's an example of just one row in the implementation matrix. So this is an action that falls under subcategory 3.1.3. So that's under goal category 3, which is a kind of our outreach and education goal area. And the subcategory is build strategic partnerships to advance pollinator protection goals. If you really want to do your homework and go back to the original action framework from 2023, that subcategory is going to have the same wording, and then the action's also going to have the same wording. And the action of this example is collaborate with the Green Step Cities program to increase education and promotion of pollinator-friendly practices. The specific project is organize a webinar to facilitate city-to-city connections to help pollinators. And the agency lead of this project is EQB. And EQB is taking that lead role, but with partners in the Department of Education and also the PCA's Green Step Cities program. And the status of this project is in progress because Rebecca is currently working with those partners to plan this webinar. The 2025 highlights section, we have a lot of great highlights this year. I'm going to talk just briefly about just a few of them. So first, the Department of Agriculture released a list of seed labelers offering insecticide-free agricultural seed in Minnesota, which we know can be very hard to find. So this should be a great resource for organic producers and others looking for insecticide-free agricultural seed. Bowser, through their Habitat Enhancement Landscape Program and the Pollinator Pathways Program, have awarded grantees, and these grantees have started installing and enhancing the pollinator habitat covered by those grants. DNR continues to survey bees and butterflies at in different locations across the state. And new this year, we've identified 2 new state species records. And so that list of bees native to Minnesota that just continues to grow, over 500 now, and getting updated all the time. MnDOT started using new seed mixes, which are designed to promote the growth of native plants. The Minnesota Zoo found signs of success from the 2024 Dakota Skipper release at Glacial Lake State Park. And this is so exciting that we used the photo of Dakota Skippers mating for the cover photo of the report. And if you look closely, they have little dots on their wings, and that's because they're marked. And so we can tell the difference between the newly released butterflies and then those that are like second generation. And that's how we know it's been successful. And then the EPB organized some really great pollinator outreach events this year, including co-sponsoring the North American Monarch Summit, which is a tri-national meeting, which was hosted in Minneapolis this year. And also coordinating, along with DNR and other agencies, the Pollinator Day at the State Fair, which continues to be a really popular and fun annual event now at the fair. One of the stories of success we are highlighting in this year's report is the Board of Water and Soil Resources new interactive map that is now available through their Living Landscape Initiative. And this Living Landscape Initiative is the portfolio of Bowser programs that include lawns to legumes, habitat enhancement landscape program, pollinator pathways, and the pollinator toolbox online resources. And this map is meant to help guide decision-making for those Bowser habitat programs. It includes the reach of those programs themselves, as well as habitat conservation priority areas identified by other agencies. So in order to focus the future efforts of those programs, Bowser is going to use this map, especially to identify areas that can connect already existing conservation areas with new and improved habitat corridors. I'm going to send it back to Rebecca for next steps.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you for that. And we are honestly really proud and very happy to showcase some of our big accomplishment this year. But I think it's also important for us to acknowledge that unfortunately this year the team faced some big challenges, financial challenges, because some of our key programs that we're using to track progress and that are making progress in the state were unfortunately either defunded or unfunded, or you say underfunded. I'm sorry. So for example, the Dakota Skipper program that the Sioux leads unfortunately has been halted indefinitely because of the lack of funding. And we know that other priority habitat programs that are important for our progress are also that they also had reduced or eliminated funded this year. Despite all of this, I think that the interagency team and I know our agencies will continue to track progress and are committed to this work. We will continue to track progress through the implementation of the action framework and also, of course, the updating the scorecards. And we will continue to collaborate, emphasizing the need to strengthen our partnerships as well and the relationships we build with outside folks and organizations, and encouraging actions that are grassroots efforts as well, because it definitely is important that we all get involved and that there's that commitment ongoing in our state. Because we believe that progress continues to be possible, but we need to be intentional about these efforts, and we will need to continue needing your support. So thank you. I think that is our last slide. Thank you for your attention, and we are now open for questions and for members of the public. And I'm sorry, the board.
Well, thank you, Rebecca and Christina. So board members, we're being asked today to approve a resolution. It's on page 11 in your packet to accept the 2025 Minnesota State Agency Pollinator Report and to support cross-agency collaboration to lead the implementation of the Minnesota Pollinator Action Framework. So with that, are there any questions from board members? If so, please just jump in or raise your hand. Go ahead, Commissioner Gronball.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Rebecca and Christina. This is a comment as opposed to a question, but just congratulations on this incredibly important work. And it's just great to see all of us agencies collaborating together and sharing this this vision and framework. And for folks who are on the Capitol complex, we have pollinator gardens here on our grounds that our groundskeepers here at the Department of Administration maintain year round, and of course in consultation with other folks, I believe through the DNR. And so it's just great to see it in action right here in our backyard too. So thank you and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Commissioner Granval, and I agree. A lot of work that's gone into this, and really appreciate that. And thanks for flagging that about the grounds, Captain Brown. Looks like we have a hand up by Board Member Nelson. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a question. I have more of a possible suggestion. I'm wondering what the board would think of and whether staff could identify some of the non-state partners in this so that they could bring some thank you cards for us to sign at the January meeting. I was impressed with a first-year report and the number of things that were listed as completed or underway for just the first year. So, and it's dear to my heart. Most of our yard is pollinator habitat. So, thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Nelson. Yeah, Rebecca, any thoughts on that question or on that suggestion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was like, wow, how come I never thought of that? Thank you. I think that sounds like a great idea. I think we will identify, I think if we can identify some of our like more recurrent partners that are part of like big projects that we work on, there might be appreciation to that, like an encouraging gesture. So we will look into that as a team. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, for looking into that. Great. Other questions or comments from board members? I don't think I'm seeing any. Check with Catherine. Any hands up or anything I'm missing?
I don't see any board member questions remaining, Madam Chair.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And thank you all. So without seeing any other hands up or board members with questions, we do want to offer the opportunity for the public to make comments on the annual pollinator report. So we'll go to the sign up sheets for those there in person who indicated they want to make a comment on this item in particular. And if you're online, please use the raise hand function if you'd like to comment or note in the chat. And Jesse will call on you and you'll be able to either come up to the table if you're there in person or unmute and speak if you are online. And please be relatively brief with your remarks, and I'll let you know if we need to wrap up due to time. I'll just cut in at that point. So Jesse, would you please call on the first commenter if you see any?
Chair Dauber, we have no one in the room who signed up to comment. And at this time, I do not see any hands raised in the meeting.
All right, great. Well, maybe give it one more moment here to see if any hands get raised or notes are put in the chat that somebody wants to jump in and comment. Great. I am not seeing anything more, so I think we can go ahead and move on to the resolution. So with that, in page 11 of your packet, the board resolves to accept the 2025 Minnesota State Agency Pollinator Report prepared by the Interagency Pollinator Protection Team. The board further resolves to support cross-agency collaboration to lead the implementation of the Minnesota Pollinator Action Framework. So this is the board accepting the report that was completed by the team. So is there a motion to approve the resolution?
Member Katzenberger will make that motion.
Thank you, Member Katzenberger. Do I have a second?
Member Bakken seconds it.
Thank you, Member Bakken, excuse me. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I think we can move to the roll call vote. Executive Director Nuschler, would you please call the roll?
Yes, Commissioner Arnold,
Aye.
Board Member Bakken,
Support.
Board Member Bauerkemper,
Yes.
Board Member Brands. Not joined us. Commissioner Cunningham, not with us. Chair Daubenberger,
Yes.
Commissioner Grunwald,
Yes.
Board Member Hintz,
Yes.
Chair Holman,
Aye.
Board Member Katzenberger,
Yes.
Commissioner Kessler is not with us. Board Member Martin,
Yes.
Commissioner Verelek, not with us. Board Member Nelson,
Yes.
Commissioner Peterson, not with us. Board Member Smith
Aye.
and Commissioner Stroman. Aye. Madam Chair, that is 12 votes in favor.
Great. Thank you, everyone. And again, thank you to the Interagency Pollinator Protection Team and to our EQB staff who worked hard to compile this report and all the great work that's been going on over the last year. So really appreciate that. All right, so then next on the agenda, item number 5 is on the continuous improvement process and the planned idea solicitation. So there are really 2 parts to this update. The board is being asked to make minor adjustments to the process from the way we've initially set it up, and that was in mid-2023. And we're going to hear from the staff on how they plan to move forward with that implementation. Our presenter today is Kayla Walsh with the Environmental Review Program. She's the administrator for that program for EQB. Welcome, Kayla.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kayla Walsh, part of the Environmental Review team here, and today I'm sharing our progress and our proposed updates to the continuous improvement process, which I will be referring to throughout as our CI process. The board first approved the CI process and directed staff to implement CI steps in June of 2023. And today's goal, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. Today's goal is to vote on an updated resolution for some small updates to the CI process steps and timing, and then we'll have some discussion before the vote. Next. In my presentation, I will give some background info on what the steps are and how we designed them. And again, as the chair mentioned, there are really 2 tracks I'll cover. The first is the proposed process updates, which require the board vote. And the second is going to require no resolution changes, but we do just want to share how staff are planning for a more targeted and efficient public process for the next solicitation of CI ideas. Next. And the CI process, again, was built out because our rules direct the board to monitor Minnesota's environmental review program effectiveness and take appropriate measures to modify and improve it. Over the past 50 plus years of our environmental review program, EQB has received many recommendations that have been scattered across many different publications, and there hasn't been a good way to regularly evaluate them and decide which ideas to use. Next slide. So in 2022, we began building out this process, the CI process, by asking 2 questions of our state agency partners, stakeholders, tribes, and the public. We asked, what does an effective program mean to you, and what ideas do you have to improve the program? And this feedback, combined with deliberations by our tech rep partners, ARIS, and the board, where it resulted in our 6 CI step process, the effectiveness criteria, which staff use to evaluate the ideas, and then the list of ideas themselves for improving the program. Next. And so when we asked what effectiveness looks like, the answers we heard really mostly fit into one of these 9 areas. What we heard from folks in 2022 also aligned with the objectives laid out in our environmental review rule to increase the criteria in these 3 areas: criteria for information, engagement, and improved process. These are the 9 criteria of effectiveness, as we call them, and it's what we use to evaluate ideas to see if they directly or indirectly increase program effectiveness. And we've called this the effectiveness matrix. And it's been really helpful to look at the idea's total effectiveness across all 9 criteria, but also if we wanted to focus on one of these areas like engagement, we can quickly see which ideas rose to the top or would be most likely to increase that engagement. So this gives us a lot of helpful data. But again, we know it's not the only data point to take into consideration when we're work planning, and there are other barriers or constraints to implementation. And that's those practicalities of project planning will come into play later in the CI process. Next slide. And so that effectiveness criteria matrix is an important step in our process, and these are a summary of the 6 steps. The board again voted in June 2023 to adopt these steps and direct staff to use them. So when I refer to a full CI run through or a CI iteration, I'm referring to completing all 6 of these steps. The first one is a call for suggestions for programmatic improvements from anyone, including governmental partners, stakeholders, tribes, and the public. And I'll talk more later about how we will refine that solicitation of ideas. Then in step 2, all of those ideas have to pertain to EQB's purview or represent an idea that could reasonably fit under EQB's jurisdiction. So in step 2, EQB staff determine if any ideas are out of scope, and we might combine like-minded ideas into one or rephrase them a little bit to set them up for scoring in step 3, where we would then evaluate the ideas with that effectiveness criteria. So staff evaluate improvement ideas based on if they directly or indirectly increase a criterion of effectiveness, and then EQB staff select ideas that are feasible and plan for their implementation. That's where we might reach out to subject matter experts, make sure that we're selecting feasible ideas. We might choose some medium or even lower ranking ideas too, but we would share our reasoning for why we would want to do that with ERIS when we present to the Environmental Review Implementation Subcommittee in step 5. And then ERIS reviews our recommendation. They can pass along any suggested changes to the full board. And then finally, the board reviews the work plan and hopefully approves the environmental review work plan. Next. So we did these 6 CI steps start to finish in 2023, and we chose to work on updating our guidance and training and evaluating decision criteria. And both of those are ongoing projects. Work plan items each year continue to support ideas that we heard through continuous improvement around climate and greenhouse gas emissions, cumulative impacts analysis, data management, guidance and training, and considering how to incorporate health into environmental review. Next. But in the spirit of continuous improvement, we do have some updates to offer to the CI steps themselves to clarify them and adjust the frequency of the full CI run through. Next. You can click once, Steph. So in 2023, some of the ideas that we received, again, were vague, or they could be combined into one project idea because they overlapped with one another. And we originally scored those in the, or evaluated them in the matrix verbatim, but we needed to document our interpretations, our assumptions. With our new solicitation template that I'll talk about in a bit, I think it should help us get some more standardized formatting of ideas so they're coming in with a bit more detail, but staff are still going to need to group the like-minded ideas or summarize or reformat them just slightly so that they can be evaluated. So step 2, we are suggesting updating the resolution to reflect this current practice by adding the words "and adjust for step 3. So again, that adjusting is just combining ideas, rephrasing a little bit to be more project oriented when needed in order to set us up for step 3 and make that more efficient. Next. So step 3, we're also proposing a minor update. It currently says EQB staff evaluate and score improvements using a program effectiveness prioritization matrix. Our intent there was to describe the matrix as a way of organizing improvements based on how they contribute to the overall effectiveness of the program, regardless of feasibility and resource constraints. But we've heard feedback that this word of prioritization can imply that the matrix is directly prioritizing our work plan, but that is not the case. Our annual work plan considers really a wide variety of possible work from CI, staff, board members, the legislature, and more. So we consider our work through many different lenses, and even if an idea sort of ticks all of the criteria of effectiveness, we still need to evaluate our capacity and resources and readiness before adding it to our work plan. And so to avoid confusion, our updated resolution just removes the word prioritization. So it reads an effectiveness matrix. Next. And then lastly, completing all of these steps every biennium as originally planned. It doesn't really leave us enough time to execute some of the bigger picture initiatives and see those results. So running through all CI steps every 4 years, starting in next January, means that we can really align our process with budget requests as well at the legislature during budget years, and sort of sets us up to acquire resources and see those results. Next. Hopefully having these steps take place every 4 years, it better integrates with our annual work planning cycle too. We're proposing to complete steps 1 through 6 every 4 years. So you can click once, Steph. Thank you. So if you think about it in terms of completing all 6 steps fully every 4 years, you can also think about it as though we're doing steps 4 through 6 every year. So you can click again, Steph. Thank you. And then our work planning is really influenced by the CI process. But if you don't submit an idea during the CI step 1 process, you can always approach staff or the board with an idea at any time. Work plan ideas are influenced by, again, many different things. You can click again, Steph. So we have things we're required to do by the legislature, what the board directs, any emergent issues that we need to tackle, and anything that comes our way that we need to do to maintain day-to-day administration of the program. So the CI process is only, again, one determinant of our ER work plan, environmental review work plan each year. Next. And so that's a summary of the changes to the step titles and timing that we would require the board vote on. And then the next slides are just an update on what staff are thinking about doing to prepare for January to set ourselves up for engagement. And they don't require any CI step changes, so they don't require a vote. Next slide. So like I mentioned, when we were asking for improvement ideas back in 2022, we didn't know what an effective program meant yet. We didn't have the criteria of effectiveness determined. And that meant our respondents didn't have the benefit of knowing how we would measure their ideas. So since it was our first time, we also asked purposefully broad questions like, share your ideas for improving the program. And so understandably, we received a very wide range of answers, and some were really vague and some were very detailed. A lot of the times we did need to make some assumptions on what the underlying issues were that the respondents were trying to solve, and we just documented those assumptions as we went. We retained all of those ideas from that solicitation and reports over time, but we're really hopeful that in the next CI run, we'll be set up an engagement HQ page that offers a little bit more structure and guidance to respondents, and hopefully results in more detailed ideas that are also easier for us to evaluate against the criteria of an effective program. Next slide. You can click once. So we'll be asking folks to submit ideas and identify if those ideas fit into one of these most frequently commented on themes of work, which are the categories in the boxes here. And those themes are based on the feedback that we heard last time in solicitation. And then after the user clicks on a work area, a survey would prompt them to share details about their idea. So you can click again. The underlying issue that they would like their idea to solve, if they think their idea requires a rule change or a guidance change, or maybe they're not sure. And then respondents can stay anonymous or optionally provide us with their email or phone number so we can contact them if we want to engage in more follow-up questions. Next slide. So again, that was just a process update that staff are actively drafting, but if the resolution passes today, this is the timeline of what we're aiming for the CI process steps. So we have this new engagement HQ format planned to launch in January, close sometime in February, and then we would review those ideas and evaluate them in the matrix. That brings us to April or May when we can start deciding on those which ideas might be feasible and planning for their implementation. And we would bring a summary of the ideas and a staff recommendation to ARIS in June. And then the final work plan for environmental review and for EQB overall would then be finalized at the board meeting in August. Next slide. So to wrap it up, these are the items that are up for vote. They are also on the board resolution language is also on packet page 66. And I'm really happy to take questions, and thank you, Steph, for the slides. Thank you, everybody.
Great, thank you, Kayla, and thanks for all the work on looking into our process for potential updates to it. So appreciate all the work on that. And at this point, we'll see if board members have any questions for you or input. Go ahead, board member Bauerkemper.
All right, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Kayla, for your various and extensive efforts across the range of EQB activities and for working on this and providing the presentation today. I'll say that while I'm not particularly excited by the prospect of shifting to this longer time scale or time cycle for the continuous improvement process, I also know that EQB lacks the capacity to sustain a quicker pace and to do it well. So I wish that were the case, but I know it isn't. So I really appreciate the work that you and your colleagues in the program have done to put forth this refined continuous improvement process. It shows a realist kind of commitment to that good work, and so I appreciate that. And I believe that even while stretching out the timeline, that it will enhance the program all the more. So I want to underscore that, and then I also want to underscore something that you indeed mentioned, which I appreciated as well, that there are other pathways in addition to or outside of or beyond the continuous improvement plan through which the annual work plan is informed and influenced and created. And so this isn't the only route, and we may see that there's a little more emphasis or interest or pressure on some of those other pathways as this becomes a new cycle. But I appreciate the necessity of the work, and it seems like a good way to kind of thread the tough needle at hand. So thank you for that. That's all. Appreciate it.
Thank you, board member Bauerkemper. Let's see. And board member Smith, go ahead.
Yeah, hello, and thanks again, Kayla. Ditto to what board member Bauerkemper just mentioned. One question for you and any other EQB staff members that might want to chime in, but just where do you see some of the risks with that elongation of the cycle? And I know you did have some of those mitigation and mid-cycle opportunities for updates and things there, but just curious, as you were going through these assessments, where you are seeing some of that risk for whether it's alignment with regulatory requirements or engagement opportunities, or what some of that mitigation might look like in the mid-cycle years.
Thank you for that question. I think it's really astute. And I don't have a very good answer because I think that if we find ourselves with the capacity to add to our work plan, that we, wouldn't be afraid to do so. But yeah, I don't know, Director Nuschler, if you have any thoughts.
Sure, thanks, Kayla and board members. So I think that it's a good question. I mean, we certainly have, as Kayla's slide noticed, about the ways that things come up, and there's lots of ways that we hear about things and decide that there are things that we need to do something about. So as much as the continuous improvement process is something we committed to and is like a structured way of doing that, certainly things come up. I don't think when we did this in the middle of 2023, anyone was thinking about data centers. And if we were doing it today, they certainly would be. So I feel pretty confident that we do hear about the things that are important. And as Kayla said, kind of this having the ideas from our partners and our stakeholders and folks who are interested in this structured way that we can review every year as we go through work planning. So many of our projects are so long term. I think it will work, and as we talk about it every year. And we also sometimes see themes emerge. Like, we don't necessarily have, like, the ideas might be very specific, but you see themes that help us say, okay, people have an interest in data or data management, and we can also think about whether there's places to work on that overall theme, even if we're not doing precisely what the ideas were that were gathered. So I think it will work well. And as Board Member Kemper noted, recognizing our capacity as well.
Excellent. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Board Member Smith, and the discussion on that. Other board members, comments or questions? Not seeing any. So with that, if there are no more board member comments or questions, at this point, we'll offer the opportunity for the public to make comments. So if you're in person, we'll call your name from the sign-up sheet and ask you move up to the front to speak. If you're online, please use the raise hand function or note in the chat if you'd like to comment. Do that either way if you're online. And Jesse will call on you, and you'll be able to either unmute and speak online or come up to the front. So please be relatively brief with your remarks, and I'll let you know if we need to wrap up due to time. So Jesse, please call on the first commenter.
Chair Daubenberger, we do not have anybody in the room signed up to comment on this item, and I do not see any hands raised virtually as well.
Great. Thank you, Jesse. I'll just give it another moment for hands to raise or comments, or excuse me, commenters to type in the chat that they want to comment. I am still not seeing any. So
Chair Daubenberger, we have one hand raised and they just lowered their hand, so maybe not. Sorry. Joy Anderson, I think I saw your hand. If you still would like to comment, there it is.
Go ahead, Joy.
Wait for Hazel. And you should be able to unmute, Joy. If not, we'll try again. Joy, why don't you give that a try again? It might have been on our end.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Yes. Oh, okay. Great. Thanks. Hi, I'm Joy Anderson. I am an attorney at Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. And this is something that I've expressed a couple times with respect to the continuous improvement program, but I think it's worth repeating one more time. And that is that the process is great. Looking at the process is great. Making sure the process works is great, but there have to be changes to the environmental review program in order for it to be
reasonable, and effective. And in order for people to keep engaging in this program, there need to be effective changes that people see go into effect. We have been participating in this continuous improvement process for multiple years now. And we have put in the same ideas over and over again. And I know that EQB is taking them and accepting them and looking at them in good faith, but I'm not seeing any changes to the program, even though a lot of our changes that we are requesting are detailed, are doable. They're not getting implemented. And I think that's a frustration that a lot of people have. They spend a lot of time on this. And I know that the EQB is spending a lot of time evaluating these issues, and then we're not seeing changes happen. So I don't know how that fits into this, but I just want to express that just having a process alone, while great, that's the first step, that's not sufficient. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Joy, for your comment. Appreciate your perspective. Are there other commenters?
Chair Davenberger, I see no other hands at this time.
All right. Thank you, Jesse. Okay. Well, with that, there is a resolution in your packet on page 66 to update this continuous improvement process. So board members, is there a motion to approve the resolution?
Member Katzenberger, so moved.
Thank you.
Holman,
Member
Watson,
second.
second.
Thank you, Member Holman. Any discussion on the motion? Not hearing anything or seeing any hands for discussion on the motion. Director Nuschler, would you please call the roll?
Certainly. Commissioner Arnold,
Yes.
Board Member Bakken,
Support.
Board Member Bauerkemper,
Yes.
Board Member Brands, Commissioner Cunningham, not with us, Chair Daubenberger,
Yes.
Commissioner Gronball,
Yes.
Board Member Hintz,
Yes.
Chair Holman,
Aye.
Board Member Katzenberger,
Yes.
Commissioner Kessler is not with us, Board Member Martin,
Yes.
Commissioner Barilak is not with us, Board Member Nelson,
Yes.
Commissioner Peterson, not with us, Board Member Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Stroman.
Aye.
That is 12 ayes, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Director Nuschler. So with that, the resolution passes. And at this point, that brings us to the point in the agenda where we worked in a break, 5-minute break. So we'll please come back at 2:12 and we'll resume for the foundational information on data centers part of this agenda today. See you at 2:12. Thank you. Director Nuschler, if you could let me know, please, when folks are settled in the room and ready to go.
But haven't figured out the boundaries. Right? It's like, well, are you done? Oh, yeah, and then I'm negotiating. I like skipping time to you. Yeah, hosting 19. Well, so how old is your? He's in college. Where is he? When did he graduate? So he's a sophomore. Always learning.
All right, everyone, are we ready to go?
We're set in the room here, Madam Chair.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming back from break. And we will now move on to our next agenda item for this month, the second part of foundational information on data centers. So last month we focused on energy and environmental review, and today we're going to focus on water issues. A lot of state agencies are involved in this work, so we have multiple presenters today. First, EQB's Catherine Nuschler, Executive Director, and then from DNR's Jason Muckle, and Met Council's Jen Kostrowski, and then Department of Health, Steve Robertson. So welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for taking the time to help us in our continuing work to get up to speed on these facilities and all the questions about them so that we can build on that understanding for future consideration of potential EQB work. My understanding is Executive Director Nuschler will again frame up today's discussion for us, and then we'll hear from three agencies, DNR, Met Council, and Department of Health, about some of the water-related issues. And I'll likely need to jump off this meeting prior to the conclusion of this agenda item and quite possibly miss the questions and comments from board members as well as the public comment period, but I'll look forward to reviewing the recorded version. So with that, Catherine, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I just wanted to do a brief recap. Last month we talked about the energy issues and the questions about electricity use and energy being used by, or that could be used by potential data centers as an emerging industry in Minnesota. And we talked a little bit about environmental review and the processes And I think at this point, you know, the EQB staff have been thinking about some of those, working with our agency partners, and we'll plan to probably bring some of the discussion about environmental review to the ARIS meeting next month, tell you a little bit about some of what we're doing as we understand these issues. And then we know that the other part, in addition to energy, that folks are really interested in is water. And with the data centers, there's sort of two components of that. There's the water use and the potential for water to be appropriated or used by these facilities for cooling. And then also once they use it, I think there's questions about how is it disposed of? Does it stay within the facility? Is it discharged? So we do have a couple of agencies here that work on both sides of those issues, and also Pollution Control Agency is not speaking today, but they might in certain cases have permitting authority around water that is discharged under their wastewater treatment authority. But I think with our presenters that are here today, we're going to get a good overview of those issues and the potential impacts of water use on other areas and talk about water planning. And so I'm going to hand it over to Jason, who's going to kick us off by talking about the water quantity, water appropriations, sort of the state of water supply in Minnesota. And then we'll move on to the rest of the presenters. So Jason, why don't you go ahead?
All right, thank you, Catherine. I feel like we're on the data center circuit. Pardon that pun. So the first set of slides that I'm going to share here today really have nothing to do with data centers specifically. They just generally have to do with meeting our water supply needs in the state of Minnesota. But then I will tie it back to data centers. So one of the things that I like to start with is that a recognition that water is in fact not unlimited, right? We can all recognize it's not unlimited. That means it's limited. So then we can start to talk about what are the things that limit our access and use of water. And they fall into sort of three broad categories. The first one is how it's distributed naturally. So where it falls, where it sits, where it's stored, and how it flows through our state. That's mostly determined by geology, for the most part, and climate. The next part is the quality, also heavily influenced by geology, but also what we do on the landscape in terms of how it might be contaminated, which can then limit our uses of it. The third piece is where we come in, and that is the uses of water. So we use water for a lot of different things in the state of Minnesota, just like everybody else in the country. Our legislature has established a priority for those water uses, domestic use being number one. The number two on this list are the small, sort of non-permitted. They're not required to get a permit. This would be like a private well. Does not require to get a permit because they're typically not using the volume of water that would trigger that permit requirement. Then we get into our agriculture sector, our energy sector, and then our industry, which I've just, for the purposes of clarity here, that includes data centers. That's number 5 on the list. And then number 6 is the non-essential category. Okay, so we understand that these are all the things that we have to consider and think about when we ask the question, can we use the water, or what are the impacts of using the water, or can we authorize the water? We have to start with the distribution and then think about quality and think about who else is using it. So the first thing that we say is that geology matters, which means location matters because our state is not the same geologically all around. So one of the things we start with is paying attention to our groundwater provinces. If you're in province 5, which is the green part of this map, those are very heavy clay soils typically, and there isn't a lot of great aquifers underneath those soils. They don't recharge very fast. Finding large volumes of water is very challenging in that part of the state. And we also have some very sensitive resources in calcareous fens that are associated with groundwater. Avoiding clustered uses, that's our next tip. Like other big volume users, right? If you cluster, you tend to stress a certain area more. That can be challenging for meeting our water supply needs. And then we do know there are places where we're already pressing up against some limits. You know, parts of the metro, in fact, this is a big question. What is the amount of water that's available in our metro area? Or in parts of Minnesota where we've got intensive agricultural uses along a trout stream, for example, Little Rock Creek. It's places like that where it's like, okay, we're already using a lot. Maybe we're hitting some limits. So that's our tip number one. And I flipped my slides, but this is fine. I'll work with this. One of the things that I want to talk about is how we use water. And on this graph, the blue indicates sort of when we're wet, and the darker the blue, the sort of wetter we are on this scale. And what you can see here is there's times when 100% of Minnesota is wet or really wet. The converse is also true. So if you look at the bottom of the graph, all the yellows and orange, that indicates when we're really dry. And if you look at when we are really dry, and then we think about and look at how much water we're using, which is what this graph is showing, we see that the peaks in our water use correspond with the periods when we're really dry. And that's because we use quite a bit of water for agricultural irrigation. That's the green line on the graph that you can see there. The blue line, which is the one that's at the highest, most of the graph, except for the last several years, is municipal public water supply, which has actually been trending down for the last couple of decades, with the exception of these dry periods. So we understand the ways in which we're using water. Industrial water use is way down on the bottom of the graph, and that's actually been flat or slightly declining for a number of years as well. Okay, so we understand a little bit more about how water is distributed or what constrains it, and we understand how we use it. And then the other part of it is this sort of existing uses, so where we're clustered. And in the metro, what we see is that we have growing cities. The rapidly growing areas are depicted on this map from Met Council. That's in the dark green. And one of the things that we're observing in our review of permit applications for new water or increased water use in the metro is that this is starting to happen in the places where we have a lot of existing private wells. So these were smaller communities that didn't have a public water supply, but homes that were supplied by their own individual well. That raises a whole nother level of questions and concerns and things we have to evaluate as we consider a permit or consider water uses. All right, and that's just the sort of urban fringe. Okay, so then the third tip, and then I'm going to get specifically into some data center stuff, is it's really important that we are very clear about how much water is actually needed. So when are we going to use it?
Yes, I do.
Are we going to use it more intensively during the summer months? Do we have some peak times of the year? Because that affects infrastructure, and it also affects how the aquifers are going to respond. It's also going to affect how other users might be impacted. And then annual volumes and all of those things go into our analysis to figure out whether or not a requested appropriation would meet the statutory requirements of Minnesota law. Okay, so data centers. We had some new statutes passed in the last legislative session, and one of those is 103G.265 subdivision 5. And there's a lot of words in the statute, but what's on the slide, basically what it does is it creates an early coordination mechanism so that a municipality or a data center proposer understands that if they can coordinate with the DNR and the DNR coordinating with Minnesota Business First Stop, collectively as agencies and Minnesota Business First Stop, we can provide information to help advise the whole decision process about whether or not a site is a good site, for example, for a data center. So under the Minnesota DNR's portion of this, we can request the kinds of specific information that allows us to understand at a given site, what's the geology, therefore, what do we know about the availability of water? What are the existing users in the area? What kind of natural resources are associated with those aquifers? And given an understanding of what's proposed for how the water will be used, when it will be used, how it will be pumped, what might the constraints be at that given site? That's what this piece of the new statute provides for. So this is a service that the DNR will provide. Right. And we've developed an application form. This is available now for any new proposals that want to, find out, and learn what that site constraints might be. But basically we ask about the kinds of water use, timing, where they're going to get the water. Is it from a well? Are you getting it from a municipality? What's the volume of use? Is there going to be on-site storage? How's the water going to be discharged? Where's it going to be discharged? We ask if they've done a Minnesota Conservation Explorer inquiry to look for rare resources. All this is just information that we can turn around and say, okay, here's what we know about this site to help inform decisions. The second statute that passed that involved the Minnesota DNR's role came in 103G 271 subdivision 5B. And this is specifically about if a data center is going to get water from a municipality, the municipality, as long as they meet the threshold of 100 million gallons a year, that municipality will then need to get an amendment on their permit that is specifically addressing that they're supplying a data center. That will allow us to do some review of water conservation measures, understand how much water they're going to be using, what kind of measures they're using inside the facility to conserve water. Is there going to be water reuse? Are they going to be discharging the water for aquifer recharge, for example? All of those things need to be considered as part of the permit application, because those are things that we then can consider in terms of how might this affect private wells in the area? How might this affect natural resources in the area? What kind of water quality concerns might be present that need to be addressed? It also then helps us determine whether or not we need to require an aquifer test or additional monitoring to fill in information gaps if there are. All right, so one of the things that we've been speaking to is that with this new statutory process for early coordination and with Minnesota Business First Stop, we have stood up a response and review team inside DNR. So when we hear about a data center, we can send them the form and say, hey, we've heard you've got a data center, you're talking about data, you've contacted somebody and said, we're thinking about a data center proposal. We can get them our form and say, hey, please fill this out so we can give you some information. So we have a team that's designated to receive and review that information so that we can turn those around relatively quickly and share whatever information we have. The whole purpose is to say, these are the constraints that we see might be present at the site that you've identified based on what you've provided in terms of the use. This is not a permit and it's not a permit review. It's just what we can identify based on the information that's been presented, what we think the constraints might be. All right, some things to consider. So a large water appropriation beyond what I've described in terms of the permit may require additional environmental review. So water appropriations that are averaging 30 million gallons per month require a mandatory EAW. And projects that meet or exceed that threshold cannot be reviewed through the AUAR process. Furthermore, while environmental review is required or ongoing, no permits can be issued. All right. Now, the other things that as we've been sort of out on the data center circuit, as it were, sharing with folks both in the industry and with communities and folks involved in these kinds of decisions are some other things to consider that, and I've just listed a handful here, but thinking about a more holistic approach to water use for the state of Minnesota. So are there other opportunities? Can we use the water more than once? And it doesn't always have to be that the data center uses the water after somebody else has used it, but maybe somebody else can use the water after the data center has used it. And if these things are thought about early in the design process, buildings, partnerships, design parameters can be considered, can be done or designed, I should say, with that in mind. And so that's where the early coordination also helps, because maybe there's identified opportunities for partnerships to reuse water, to use the water a second time and take all these other things into consideration. So these are things that we are also hearing from others that they're interested in. And I think there's going to be a lot of ongoing conversation in this area over the next year or years to come. And that is it for my slides. Are we taking questions now, Catherine?
That is up to Chair Martin's discretion, whether we want to do questions now or go through the 3 agency presentations and then have questions for all of you.
Thanks, Executive Director Neusler. I don't have a strong feeling on that. If we are doing okay on time and want to sort of have brief clarifying questions, you know, not getting into comments, but sort of brief questions after each, that would be fine with me. Are we okay on time for that?
Yeah, I think so. If we stick to clarifying questions.
Yeah, okay. Any clarifying questions then from board members?
I see Board Member Bauer Kemper there, Chair.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry, Member Bauer Kemper.
Thank you, Chair. Quick question. Thanks for the presentation. When it comes to water use, I'm wondering, there was a category labeled non-essential, I think, and I'm curious if you can help me understand how that category is defined, and you know, maybe tied to that are the other categories they've been determined to be essential, and what is the nature of that determination? Thanks.
Yeah, Member Bauer Kemper. The non-essential is defined. The best example is lawn watering, things that are not required as part of sort of health and human safety. The statute isn't really clear that the others are considered essential. So, I mean, you know, it's been around for a long time, but domestic use, I think we all think of it as essential. I think, you know, in agriculture, they think of it as essential, but it's mostly, you know, like in our experience, it's lawn watering, it's car washes, things where, you know, if we're in an emergency situation, if we had a period of shortage, these are the things we'd cut back first, really, that's the sort of context for those priorities.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
I think we have another quick question here, but I can only see the initials, so I don't know who that is. I'm sorry.
I think, Mr. Chair, that might be an early hand for a public comment. We don't, don't see any other board member hands at the moment, except Member Katzenberger just raised his hand here in the room.
Okay,
yeah, so
member, yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Nick. Or Executive Director.
Chair, acting chair.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah. Sorry about that. So the public is concerned really about, you know, these data centers kind of going through the kind of development process, pre-development process, not really having a category for it. But from your presentation just now, it sounds like that if the water use, no matter how they're going through AUAR, whether they get to a higher level of environmental review that they have to go through, but from the DNR standpoint, they're actually, if they reach a threshold of water use, they're covered in kind of a review process, right? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, so the data center, there's the new laws that were passed this last year were specific to data centers, and the trigger level was 100 million gallons a year. But if I were to sort of flip it around and say, if a data center is looking to develop in Minnesota and they're not gonna hit 100 million gallons a year, but they're gonna have their own water supply, like maybe they're gonna put some wells on site, or maybe they're moving into a place that was agricultural irrigation, for example. In that case, they still need to get a permit from us. They just don't fall under the data center 100 million gallon a year requirement. However, if they get water from a municipality and it's not 100 million gallons a year or more, then the municipality supplies water to that, just like any other customer industry that they have. That does not require a separate additional review from the DNR unless the municipality needs to amend their permit because maybe they need more water authorized on their permit. So that's a case where it could require an amendment. So, I mean, there's several ifs here. I'm trying to clarify, you know, in the question that you asked. Standalone facilities with their own supply over 100 million gallons have to get, whether they get over 100 million gallons or not, pardon me, would have to get a permit from the DNR. If they're getting their water from a municipality, then it just depends on where that municipality is and their authorized volume and what permit process they need to go through and the size of the facility too.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Hope that was helpful. I felt like I talked myself into a circle there for a second.
And just to add a quick question of my own to that, Jason, before you even get to the permit stage, you mentioned that there's a threshold of monthly use that sort of triggers a mandatory EAW. Is that right? And is that the only thing that is it water use currently the only trigger for a mandatory EAW, or are there other things that do that as well?
Well, the water use is the trigger for that category of mandatory EAW. I have to defer to somebody else on the other categories of EAW.
Yeah, Chair Martin, I mean, I think what we've kind of said is like there are multiple EAW categories that a data center could trip, probably likely to be driven by the size of the building, whether there's any land conversion, what type of on-site energy generation there might be. The water appropriation is one of them, but there's kind of multiple things that they could fall under. The water appropriation is like that's the only one sort of specific to that area.
Okay.
And
yeah.
Commissioner Stroman might want to clarify there as well.
Thank you, Acting Chair Martin and Executive Director Nussler. I do not want to clarify, but I do want to note that Kate Fairman from our Environmental Review Unit is here too. And so I know there are a lot of questions about like environmental review generally and triggers and environmental review to data centers and the confusion between like our environmental review requirements and our permit are to water use, whether it is a data, as Jason said, like whether it is a data center or another large water user. And so if there is still need to clarify, we could have Kate and Jason tag team on that too.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Stroman. I think it would make sense to move on to the next presentation for now, and obviously we'll have time after all of them for further discussion and questions as well.
Good afternoon, Chair and board members. My name is Jen Kostrowski. I'm the Assistant Manager of Water Policy and Planning within the Met Council. Excited to be speaking to you today. Throughout my presentation, I will be using the term high volume water user just because I know data centers are a concern, but it is not the only user that we are keeping our eye on within the Metro. So it is a little bit of a code switch, but I want you to know like we are thinking a little bit more broadly beyond just data centers. I'm here today to talk about what happens when those users do come to the Metro and what are the steps that the council is taking to try to plan to accommodate these industries. So a little bit of an outline, give a little bit of background, and luckily I have the opportunity going after Jason, which means I'll quickly breeze through the background. Talk a little bit about some specific Metro plan and processes because we do have some a little bit unique planning opportunities, I'll call them, within the Metro. I'll share some of our areas of concern and then lastly get to some conclusions. I do want to say from the outset, some areas of concern are specific to the Metro, but some are broad. So please do, I guess, listen with open mind as I talk about some of these areas of concern because it's not necessarily specific to the 7-county area. So the first part of this, and a lot of states across the nation are wondering what makes a special location that high volume water users are looking for. And so these are some of the characteristics that they are looking for, and that is abundant water, capacity within the electrical grid, fiber optic cables and latency, robust transportation or distribution corridors, land availability, financial incentives, and a skilled workforce. And if we take these characteristics and apply it to the 7-county metro, you'll see across the board, we're answering yes, we have those things. And I added one more at the bottom, which is a cold climate, because that also helps entice certain industries so that they don't have to spend as much for year-round cooling. They can just open the windows in the winter, and nature kind of helps them out with that dissipation of heat. And so knowing that we are an ideal location, how do we plan for this? Some of this is part of the environmental review process that we do get to participate in as a state agency. And then we have some specific planning roles that the council fall in for the 7 counties. So just to step through the process, we do know that economic development teams will help to guide the project to our metro. And then municipalities are approached to see if they have the right sort of land use, power use, water use that could welcome this industry to their communities. Agreements are reached, and then that's when that concept goes public. And that is where sometimes Met Council planners or environmental reviewers statewide get notified that that is when this happens. I will say 2 additional reviews that do happen within the council is that we do have to issue a will serve notice. And so that is when the site design is happening. We will get approached from the wastewater treatment side of things, from our regional wastewater system, to make sure that we have the capacity, if that water was to be discharged within our regional system, to take on that. So we do some initial pre-calculations when those projects are initially getting through the site design. And then we also have some comprehensive plan updates or amendments. I'll get a little bit more about the comp plan process a little bit later in this presentation. After we have that opportunity to review and make comments on the plans, usually this is when this gets brought to larger attention to the public. And so this is the process we have seen unfold within the metro and that we have been participating in. For the site design and will serve, just to be very simple, developers need infrastructure so that they can have industry come to that parcel. We do know that Greater MSP and Minnesota DEED have been reactively recruiting different industries to the metro, and that is great for a robust economy. And so we usually are contacted by one of their representatives or a technical representative when we think a project should be coming in or would be coming into the metro. There is a request and estimates about what that wastewater service impact would be. And so we then go through our conveyance systems, which are the pipes that go throughout the metro to help convey that waste to our water resource recovery facilities, which were formerly known as wastewater treatment plants. We have rebranded. And so we do an assessment of our entire wastewater system, both from the conveyance side and the treatment side, to make sure that we can take on this additional volume. I do want to say one part of that this makes this a little tricky for us is the Met Council, just as a standard, does not sign non-disclosure agreements. And so even at this point, there's a little bit of information that is not shared with us because we will not sign those NDAs. And so that puts staff in sometimes a tricky space because we're being asked if we can take on this capacity without knowing the full details of the plan. We do the assessment, and then usually we continue to engage throughout the process with the developers, engineers, to try to better understand. But this is where we initially have our first brush with knowing that these industries are coming into the metro. And I just hit the wrong button, I'm sorry. Okay, try that again. All right. Another part that is specific to the council is the comprehensive plan process. The council is charged with our mission to make sure that we have a prosperous and economic future that we are growing together within the 7-county region. And the way we do this is through long-range planning to make sure that we're accounting for our regional needs. We have every 10 years, we update a long-range plan called the Regional Development Guide. It looks 25 years out into the future. And it works with our communities to distribute future population growth and different trends so that we can accommodate and work together within our region. When After we create our regional development guide, we then have local plans submitted so that the communities within the local units of government within the metro can plan accordingly and plan cooperatively with folks within the metro. And so, as you can see, some of those big blue words are plan, coordinate, provide, and assist. And that is the role the council helps to support our local governments as we are working together. They all submit their comprehensive plan updates after we have our regional policy plan. And then if there's any changes to their intended future land use over the next 10 years, they can and should and will submit a comp plan amendment. And so that allows communities to change their land use planning or change what is happening. And usually this is when we also touch into high volume water users. We will be notified that a land use needs to change to accommodate this new industry. And so council planners then evaluate that change through the 3 C's. And so you can see those blue bubbles behind me, and I'm now going to turn around to read specifically. So we want to make sure that we are getting conformance with regional system plans. So this comes to like the wastewater example. We want to make sure that that local change does not impact the regional plan that we had for our system. We want to make sure that that land use change and intended future use is consistent with council policies. And then we want to make sure that that change is compatible with neighboring jurisdictions. And so council planners will evaluate that change and make comment about that plan amendment. As we are going through this new space and time with high volume users, water users coming to the council, we have identified across our planning groups key areas of concern. And I want to walk through a few with you. And again, this is specific to the metro, but can be applied outside of our jurisdiction boundaries. First off, this is just some basic hydrology. If you have a high volume well that is withdrawing from groundwater, you will receive a drawdown cone. It's the equivalent of sticking your straw in your glass of water and sucking very hard. You can see that surface water going down. And as you can see in this picture, if there was a shorter straw in that glass that you are pulling water from, suddenly that shorter straw might not be having access to the water. That's called well interference. And that usually happens when there is a private well that is close to a high production or higher producing deeper well. Also on the screen, we have an image of a wetland, and that is a stand-in for any surface water that could be groundwater dependent. So that could be a trout stream, that could be a fen, a bog. If we are disconnecting those surface water features from that groundwater, that could create issues. We also have learned that as that drawdown cone fluctuates, this can mobilize some pollutants into drinking water, and that has a concern that has been identified, and we comment on that as well. And so all of these are just, it's not guaranteed. Pumping can happen responsibly, but these are just some of the concerns that we start looking at when we know there is going to be a higher volume being put into the metro area. Jason mentioned some of this, and this is the thinking about how the water supply will be allocated. There are some options that we won't know at the time when we are trying to make our decision from the comp plan process or environmental review. We won't know if the industry will be getting its own appropriations permit or if it will be connecting to a municipality permit. And so there are different avenues and trade-offs. Both are valid for local governments to make that decision, make sure that it's in their best interest. But I want to just state, like, sometimes we don't have all of the information at the time when we are being asked to make a decision. When you are thinking about these trade-offs, there are both advantages and risks to having a high volume water user come on a municipal permit. And these are some of the conversations that we do have with our local governments as we're speaking with them throughout this process. And so as a water supplier, one advantage of having a high volume water user come onto your municipal system is that you have just gained a customer that will be paying in exchange for the water that you are providing them on your municipal system. And that amount of money can provide stability for municipal systems. It can help make sure that that stability also can build to enhancing the system to provide better service to your other customers. And it could reduce the risk of well interference if that high volume water user is not putting in its own well. So if you bring it onto your own system, you don't have that risk of interference. However, there are additional risks. It could come at cost of expanding your municipal system if you need more pumps or infrastructure to move that water. You might be liable, the city might, or municipality might be liable to repair any damage to affecting neighboring wells. You wouldn't be able to necessarily limit the industrial demand during drought restrictions. And you may limit your ability to grow without additional water appropriations. One of those concerns that we do have of limiting your growth into the future is part of forecasting the regional growth in the metropolitan area. We do assign different areas of growth and expected population growth points for our cities. And this suddenly becomes like a trade-off between bringing on a current or near future industrial user that might be taking a large volume of your water supply on your municipal permit in exchange for that future population growth. And so these are some of those conversations that we have within the council. Just to be clear, water supply is not one of our regional systems that we have authority and we can talk about regional impacts to, but population growth is one of those consistency checks that we work with our communities, and water supply is foundational to ensure you have a healthy and strong population. So it's a little bit intertwined, and these are the conversations that we are having. And lastly, or sorry, from the surface water point, this is going to be the last point. It's just that cumulative impacts affect water systems. And so if you have one system or one high volume water user, that will have a impact on both your water supply and wastewater systems. But if you start co-locating multiple high volume water users in an area, that is going to put stress on both the water supply systems, and if all of those industrial users are routed towards the same wastewater treatment, water resource recovery facility, this could have impacts on the capacity of that receiving facility as well. Speaking about wastewater, and I feel as though this is the part that we don't often discuss as in depth as water supply. But we do have concerns from the wastewater side. First off is the volume. If you do have 100 million gallon per year user, that means you have not necessarily 100 million gallons discharger, but it's still going to be a high volume water discharger potentially connecting to the regional wastewater system. And that amount of volume could impact the scaling and size of the conveyance system needing to bring that water to our treatment plants, and also thinking about the capacity of our plants. And this is where, again, that cumulative impact is of great concern, because if along the conveyance system you do have multiple users, suddenly that impact is just going to be increasing by orders of magnitude. Additionally, we do have water quality concerns. The volume of water does not carry as much carbon, I'll try to say it in this way, carbon, as our typical wastewater raw sewage. And we rely on microbes and biological processes at our wastewater treatment plant to effectively and efficiently treat that wastewater. So if we are bringing in large volumes of water that does not have as much of that carbon load, our microbes are not getting the same level of food that they usually get. And that can affect our wastewater processes and affect the way that we can operate our systems to make sure that we really are meeting compliance. So there are concerns that that volume can dilute the impact on our microbe community and affect the process. Additionally, we also have concerns about industrial waste permitting and effluent permitting from the outside of, or from the exit point of our wastewater treatment plants. We do know that there are additives that are sometimes added to cooling water within data centers specifically, but other systems that use water as a cooling process. And so we know that those additives that could be biocides or could be different anti-corrosive chemicals, they might have impacts on what is sent to the water resource recovery facilities. And those chemicals could be some of the chemicals that we are already permitted on, thinking about what our pollution discharge elimination system permits are on our effluent from the resource recovery facilities. And so this is a concern that, we know that there are going to potentially be sulfate permit raises in the future. And if sulfate is one of those chemicals, we need to think about how we are taking that into our wastewater system, for example. I promise I'm wrapping up here. We just have a lot of key concerns. One of the biggest concerns that we have shared amongst our reviewers is that we are being asked to make decisions before we know the complete story. And so this is true for environmental review. This is true for the comprehensive plan amendments. And this is true for some of our industrial waste permitting. And the way that our current pattern is for industrial waste permitting is that you wait until the system is built and operated so you can have real numbers to test on what that strength charge will impact our wastewater system. And we don't want to build giant data centers just to say no with that industrial waste strength check. And so again, we're being asked to make a lot of decisions before we have the full amount of information. And so we know that all of these things are starting to have long-term effects on our regional growth management. And that we know we need to start balancing these decisions and thinking about when different industries come to the region, how this is going to affect the patterns of our growth. If it is going to reduce the amount of future population, that future population does have to be distributed elsewhere in the metro. And so we will have to figure out how we can accommodate that regional growth management. And so in conclusion, we are trying to find ways to best advance our regional goals. The council is committed to continuing to provide regional service with the same or better levels of service while minimizing the additional financial and environmental costs to our regions and communities as these users are coming to the metro. I want to be clear that the region can have industrial growth without necessarily sacrificing future needs, but we need to make sure that we do have the right information at the right time to make that right decision. And this is the part that we and my staff have been trying to go out there and support, is that a lot of local government staff are being asked to evaluate these questions without also having the same or right amount of information. And so we have been going out to try to support local governments trying to navigate their way through this system. I work for the division that is called Environmental Services, so apologies for that acronym that slipped through. ES is Environmental Services. My staff and I are working with some consultants to evaluate the impacts on regional water supplies and environmental impacts, and trying to distill that into a fact sheet that we can distribute to our local government planners so that they can have some information. And I will also say we have been engaging, just last week I was engaging with our council member at the Met Councils to think about potential policy shifts within the council as well to think about that. I want to thank you very much for this time.
Thank you so much, Jen. That was a very informative presentation. I think we'll take a few minutes again for any clarifying questions from board members. Member Katzenberger.
Yeah, thank you. So you mentioned water availability and water quality. Those are kind of technical issues. What a lot of ratepayers are concerned about is water cost. And the cost you put in this big system, it's going to add, you mentioned, could add energy, could add infrastructure, could add, you got diluted water. How do you make that less diluted and all this kind of thing? What are the mechanisms, or who is handling those conversations about who pays for those additional costs so that it doesn't necessarily impact the residents, the ratepayers?
That's remember Katzenberger, that is a really great question. Within the metro, because the Met Council is not the water supply utility, but we are the regional wastewater operator, those questions actually have to happen in duplicate. And so from the supply standpoint and how it could be impacting the infrastructure from a local water supplier, those conversations have to be happening between the public works within that municipality and the developer and the site design developer. And then on the backside, that's where that will serve process is where we get engaged to make sure that change can be accommodated. If it turns out that we have to increase our regional infrastructure, and we haven't crossed this bridge, but I was in a meeting this morning talking about this, we need to start thinking about, like, if we say yes to one industry, and that means that from the wastewater side, we have to scale up our infrastructure to accommodate. Does that get distributed across the region? Because we are a wholesaler to all of our 111 customer communities. And so does that get distributed to all 111? Or do we say that it's coming in this city, and so it's a targeted rate increase? I will say historically within the council, we do distribute costs across the region because that industry increases our regional economic ability. And so the region will bear that cost. But from the supply side of things, then that would be in that community's water supply rate increase. It's tricky.
Yeah, thanks. Great answer.
Thank you. Board Member Nelson.
Yeah, I had a question regarding comprehensive planning. And I'm wondering, there's the 7-county metro area, and then there's the rest of the state. And I don't know if you know or have that, but how much of the rest of the state has some sort of mechanism, whether it's voluntary or not, to do this type of future infrastructure planning and to anticipate and do this type of thing?
Board Member Nelson, that is a wonderful question, and I do not know it off the top of my head, but I am also now curious.
That's something we're going to have to look into. I don't have the answer either.
Do you have any other board member questions in the room there, Catherine, or can't see?
No, I don't see anyone.
Okay. Well, let's move to our last presentation, Mr. Robertson.
Okay, thank you. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Very good, very good. Well, Chair Martin, board members, thank you for this opportunity to talk in front of you today. My name is Steve Robertson. I'm a assistant section manager for the drinking water protection section at the Minnesota Department of Health. And you might be wondering what the health department has to say about large volume water appropriators, and the subset of those, as Jen was describing, that are data centers. And really, so the framework that I'm going to be using to talk to you today is the manner in which we, as the health department, are reaching out to our regulated community, which are local governmental units that operate public water systems. And those are the systems that supply drinking water at a local level. And these are the systems that are often find themselves on the front lines when they're confronted with a development, prospective development that might include a large volume water demand. So I'm going to take a moment here and share my screen. Okay. Hopefully it looks like that's coming through okay. Can I get a thumbs up, Chair Martin? I can see you still. Yes, okay. So as I said, I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the issues that public water systems face with regard to new large volume water appropriators. And these fall into 4 broad classes that I'll work through in order. when a new appropriation is appropriated directly from the public water system. We've heard some mention of that already this afternoon. Also, when a new water source, when the water demand is going to be met by a new water source, usually that's a well, separate from the public water system. I talked a little bit about some of the land use considerations that bear on new developments with regard to drinking water protection and maintaining public trust. So a very common way for a new large volume water demands to be met is to connect to an existing public water system. These are the systems that municipalities use to distribute drinking water. And they're commonly run by municipalities at the local level. And while supplying water is a key part of what most Minnesota communities do, it does not mean that meeting the demand of a new large volume water user is a seamless process. There are regulatory and engineering issues that need to be considered, and these may take time and money to navigate. So as we've heard already this afternoon, key consideration is for the municipality that's supplying the water is their existing DNR appropriations permit sufficient to meet their needs. Sometimes it will be, sometimes it won't be, but regardless, they'll have to think about the time and energy needed to navigate that review process, especially if an update's needed. If the secondly, and probably more complicated, they'll have to think about whether their infrastructure is sufficient to meet the needs and the demands that are being presented to them. Do they have sufficient wells? Do they have sufficient capacity in their treatment plant? Are the distribution conveyances adequate to supply the needs of the new water user? All of that can take some time and energy and coordination within the municipality to make sure that the utility folks know what the economic development folks are promising and vice versa. That needs to be adequate communication within the utility. And if there are new wells or treatment plants or distribution systems that are needed, MDH has regulatory review requirements for those kinds of things. In particular, plans and specs need to be prepared and reviewed by our engineers to make sure they meet Safe Drinking Water Act requirements. Because, first and foremost, these distribution systems are used for drinking water supply. So in order to navigate that, some of these requirements, municipalities are going to need to plan time and prepare financially for the infrastructure development there. Next, let's think about the scenario if a new water demand is met separate from the public water system. So in contrast to the scenario we just described, it would not be unusual for a new large volume or large quantity water user to satisfy its needs by developing a new source of supply. In Minnesota, that's most commonly going to be with a new well. And the principal issue that this presents to the local community is that a new well has the potential to alter the groundwater flow regime in a significant way. What does that mean? What's a groundwater flow regime? That's kind of the way in which the groundwater flows in the subsurface through the aquifer, and it can be complicated. And the point is that changes to the groundwater flow conditions can disrupt the status quo in a manner that has downstream implications, for public water systems. This can mean that some of the existing planning that a community may have made to safeguard its sources of supply through wellhead protection and putting in place a drinking water supply management area may be disrupted. If a new well is placed in close enough proximity to existing pumping, it can alter the flow regime in a way that might change the size and shape of the existing duisma in a way that might change it in a meaningful manner. It could also, new sources of pumping may also entrain nearby plumes of contamination. So that's a consideration, especially if there's already contamination that the system is having to manage through treatment, and if that treatment system is designed to operate within design parameters that could be disrupted by changes in chemistry if the dynamics of existing plumes are disrupted by new changes in groundwater flow. And lastly, the new appropriations can affect private wells, as we've heard a little bit from Jen, both not just in terms of the possibility that they could be that their shorter or shallower depth may be disrupted by lower water levels as a result of pumping, but also because we've seen that on occasion it's possible for water quality conditions to change meaningfully in private wells as a result of new, larger capacity pumping. So those are some of the issues that we're trying to identify and help public water systems manage relative to new appropriations. Associated with just generally speaking, with the new development, whether it's a data center or something different, is where is this happening? Is it within the drinking water supply management area? Is that drinking water supply management area vulnerable? And meaning are land uses in that area, do they have the potential to affect the underlying groundwater conditions? So when we're thinking about things, new developments, we often think about changes in stormwater management, how it might be infiltrated near or in close proximity to the DWISMA, whether there's fuel storage or other kinds of storage happening on the site that might bring into might mean managing potential sources of contamination that aren't currently there. And there's other similar kinds of activities that new land uses might need to have are considered relative to the vulnerable drinking water supply management area. Also, there's the general issue of maintaining the public trust. So with a public water system, that's a key consideration. And it's largely because these new large developments of all kinds, including those involving new large volume water users, really bear on maintaining or stewarding the public trust relative to delivering a product like drinking water that many people prioritize in their for their own public health or for their own public health protection. And since community systems are serving the public, this is a consequential matter for them, although sometimes it's underappreciated. And some of the key tenets of communication relate to being transparent and proactive when you have key changes happening within the community. And a lack of transparency can undermine the public trust in those situations. And some of the things you'll hear from risk communication professionals are things like, if they hear about a project from you first, they'll trust you first. That kind of bears on being proactive and transparent in your commitment to communicate openly and publicly and maintaining the public trust. But if they hear from you last, then they're going to trust you last, and that is kind of indicative of a reactive or secretive kind of approach towards some of these changes. So when we work with systems, we try to encourage them to be as open and transparent as they can regarding these new developments, and if they have to engage in non-disclosure agreements, to try to make those as narrow as possible so that they can talk as clearly and openly as they can with their community about some of these changes. Those are the main issues I wanted to talk about. I guess I'll just say, as a wrap up, municipalities and we acknowledge that municipalities in Minnesota have a legitimate interest in seeking to expand their tax base and develop in a responsible manner. And citizens also have legitimate concerns that such development requires large resource needs. So, as an adjunct to what I just presented, MDH is preparing guidance to help communities navigate this process when there's new large volume water supply issues in play. And it's going to address many of the issues I've presented in this, or that I mentioned in this presentation. We hope to have it ready in the next few weeks, and in addition to identifying some of the issues, we'll have some information about how communities can navigate through some of this process in a successful way. So I'm going to stop now and see, Mr. Chair, if there's any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Mr. Robertson. First, any clarifying questions just for Mr. Robertson? Board members.
Don't see any here in the room, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So I want to open it up now to a broader discussion about any of the presentations, further questions you might have, anything you might be interested in learning more about, or just any other issues you want to raise or ask our presenters today, board members. Board member Nelson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a couple of questions both for DNR and for Met Council. And first of all, I have to acknowledge that Jason taught me a lot about stream ecology, stream morphology 25 years ago, and I'm still grateful. So I'll ask the difficult question now after that is, has DNR ever said no to an appropriation permit? Or is it by that time they're so far down the line that they think that things can be worked out by the time they apply?
Mr. Chair, yeah, the answer to yes, we have, Paul. It doesn't happen all that often. We're usually able to find ways that permit applications can be modified, or an installation can be located in such a fashion to meet most of the needs. But off of my top of my head, in my years in the Division of Ecological and Water Resources, that's the only world that matters to me, is my years in it. I know of 12 permits that were denied. But I also know that when we implemented a process 11 years ago it's called a preliminary well assessment, we get prospective appropriation permit applicants that notify us before they ever drill the well that they're thinking about a high volume appropriation in a given area. We get a lot of those that never become permit applications. So what I think that says a lot is that the early information that we've provided helps somebody make a decision that never led to us having to say no. Now, we don't always know the outcome, right? People just decide not to do a project, but we get a large percentage, and don't ask me what it is, but I know it's a good number, of those assessments that we send out that never result in an actual application. And we think that's been a huge, I was just commenting, a huge policy win for the state of Minnesota.
Thank you. So the early engagement and sort of then follow up on that is that within environmental review, there's a hold on permits until some of that is completed. And part of the environmental impact statement purpose is to inform permitting. How dependent are you in those cases on environmental review, or is the process that DNR has pretty self-contained, informative? You get enough information on your own to make good decisions, or are you very reliant on the environmental review process?
I'm thinking about your question, Paul. So I think that the environmental review process identifies a whole host of things to be considered on a project, right? some of what can come up in an environmental review process can shed light when it comes to the DNR's appropriation permitting process. But our permitting process is robust and does a really good job of assessing a whole lot of things under Minnesota statute. Most of our permits come to us not having had to go through environmental review. But I think that the environmental review process does identify, in particular, like natural resource features that might be sensitive to and connected to a groundwater system. But, you know, we don't see appropriation permits with every EAW, and we don't get an EAW for every appropriation permit. But that doesn't mean that they don't serve to inform each other. Well, EAWs informing or permitting.
Thank you. For Met Council, very quickly, do you know if local limits or pretreatment limits have ever been or can be used for temperature?
Board Member Nelson, I am not 100% certain on this, and I can go back to get the answer, but my gut instinct is we have not. I do know that our effluent permitting, we do not have a temperature requirement from our effluent permitting. So I don't know if we have from the industrial waste side. That being said, if it is very, very hot water by the time it gets to the plant, again, we want to make sure that our biology, my microbe colleagues, are not going to be dramatically impacted. And so it's again, very good question. I will check into it.
And my last question there, you know, Pig's Eye, your treatment plant there is enormous. I'm assuming that would take a lot of low carbon water to upset Pig's Eye. So is the worry more with the smaller plants, and that might be something more constraining for actually small municipalities that are out state, as a worry for whether the mixing and there's enough carbon or food for the bugs in effluent from these facilities?
Yes, Board Member Nelson, this is a very astute difference, and you are correct. Right now within the metro, a lot of the high volume water use action is happening within Dakota County. And so we are specifically concerned and have been doing some investigations with our water resource recovery facility that is in Empire Township. It is called the Empire Wastewater Treatment Plant. And so it is one of our smaller facilities that we've had throughout the metro. And that is where, again, co-locating, dilution, all of those different factors, because it is a smaller capacity facility. That is why we have our concerns that we have. And yes, this would be a similar concern for wastewater systems outstate as well.
Thanks, Member Nelson, for those questions. Other board members? Member Smith.
Yes, hello, and thank you all so much for your presentations this afternoon. Very informative and helpful as we're continuing the information gathering stage and really learning more about this area. I guess a couple questions here is, I guess first and foremost, and this might be DNR, this might be MDH, this might be any of you actually. Do we currently have publicly available data sets that show a range of water usage for some of these large capacity industries, whether it's data centers, whether it's bottling, you know, whatever the industry might be? Is there a data set that actually exists time now that's available for the public constituents to view and see what that looks like?
Well, this is Jason from DNR. I'll phone a friend here too, if they want to. So there's different ways I can think about the question you're asking. So for data centers or large volume facilities in the state of Minnesota, let's just clarify that every individual industry permit that we have issued through the DNR, that data is all publicly available on our website. So anybody that has high volume permit from Minnesota DNR in the state of Minnesota, that's on our website. That's published, the amount of water they use, the reported monthly volumes. We don't have any hyperscale large data centers yet operating in the state of Minnesota. And the one that's under construction now, to my best of my understanding, is not intending or planning or designed to use water as its primary cooling method. So the only thing we have in terms of water use on data centers in the state of Minnesota, and there are, to my understanding, 40, what we might think of as small scale data centers, server rooms, as it were, you know, things, but not hyperscale, but not what would fit in this room either, I don't think. But there are 40 sort of data centers that, this is what I've learned, but none of them are using anywhere close to the volume of water that falls under the category of the new statutes or the 100 million gallon threshold. And they're all getting their water from municipal water suppliers. Now, our municipal water suppliers do report who their biggest customers are. So we can look at any one city's water supply plan. You can query every water supply, you know, you can find it and say, okay, well, who are the 10 biggest users in that municipal system? So we can find that if they're one of the top 10. But it's really variable depending on which community you're in.
And I guess it would also be is there information or data out there about similar industries or large capacity users in different climates similar to Minnesota, or that could be extrapolated to be similar to Minnesota climate? I guess that would just be a good research for those nerds of us out there in the world.
So Member Smith, you're asking the same question we've been asking for quite some time. And I will say that we are learning more because, you know, what we hear about with data centers is a sort of big number, right? Let me just say, we've heard a lot of big numbers. But as we get farther into this, what we're finding out is that, well, they really weren't, that's really not what they're actually planning to use. They're actually planning to use something different. And I'm like, well, gosh, it'd be great if you just tell everybody that. But here's what I'm going to tell you what we've been learning is that the data centers that were built 10 years ago and 5 years ago are not the same designs that data centers that are going to be built next year, the year after that are using. There is a lot of change happening in the cooling technology sector. We've been spending a lot of time trying to go to places where we can learn about this and find out what these technologies are, what else is associated with that technology, because it gets at these questions about, well, are we adding things to the water and then are we going to be discharging that water? And then what's that going to, you know, like, so it's knowable, but my caution would be we can't assume that what we hear about for state whatever is the same design idea that might be proposed for Minnesota in this location of that part of that county. Like those do not necessarily equate. And I think that's been part of what's been hard, right? People are searching for answers to sets of information and hasn't been readily available.
And I think that just gets to that point of modeling, and we model things all the time with information we don't know, but based on information we have. So a similar process, I'm sure. One other quick follow-up question, and this is an aside, so I know it would probably come into more with Public Utilities Commission and others, but is the water generation necessary for the power, or excuse me, water use necessary for power generation, is that also reviewed I guess through when you all are looking at appropriations, does that come into play at all, or is that completely separate from some of the information details that you all look at?
Member Smith, that is separate. So power generating facilities in Minnesota have their own appropriation permits through the Minnesota DNR. Almost all of it, almost entirely all of it is surface water based. I mean, like 99.9, I think there's like a little bit of groundwater backup in there somewhere, but it's almost all surface water based. And I will just share and observe for folks that in our latest water availability and assessment report that was published in September of 2025, we did in fact point out that there is an interesting trend in that, don't quote me on the exact numbers, but we're using power generating in Minnesota is using about 200 billion gallons less water a year now than we were 30 years ago, give or take a few millions, but it has been going down.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Appreciate it again. Thanks for all the information sharing this afternoon.
Thanks, Member Smith. I want to go pretty quickly to public comments here. I just have a quick question of my own to add in before we do that. This is piggybacking a little bit on Member Katzenberger's question about costs and costs impacts on other water users. And I think maybe this will be directed to you, Jen. So we heard last month about the energy sector, and you also hear, within the energy sector, you also read a lot of articles about like cost impacts data centers may have on electricity bills and so on. And so the PUC has a fairly developed process that they're really trying to look at this and make sure that data centers are covering their own cost. And of course, I'm just curious, I know so much less about water, both wastewater and water supply systems. I'm just curious, one of the things in the energy world is that like a new big user, even if there's an infrastructure cost to serve them, if they also increase sales significantly, this is on the energy side, then those revenues can overall more than offset, and they can be a benefit to the system, right? But they can also be a negative on the system if the cost allocation is not done pretty carefully. And I know the PUC is thinking about that on the energy side. So I'm just curious how much of that same conversation is happening and same sort of regulatory mechanisms would you say exists on at least in your world, or to the extent you can speak to it on the water supply side too?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chair. I'll speak first to the water supply side, and then I'll speak to the wastewater side of this. Within the water supply world, each local utility has the ability to set their own rate structure and decide how to apply those charges. And so this is a very easy way to say there is no set best practice, but there are options that can definitely recoup those costs. If a community decides to take on a rate structure that could say like a tiered rate structure, where as volume increases, you increase the cost of water. I mean, in this case, like you want to make sure that you are not affecting the industry's bottom line as well, but you do need to make sure that the community is recouping the cost of having to develop that infrastructure for that member joining their system, that industry joining that system. Again, though, that is a local decision. It is not set or organized at all by the Met Council. Within the wastewater side of things, when we look at how to apply the costs of operating the regional wastewater system, we do have meters that measure flow along the way throughout our entire sewer shed in the metro area. And so we proportionately charge communities based on the amount of the total volume that we received from their community versus the total volume that we received system wide. And so it's pretty trying to make sure that it is distributed amongst all of our customer communities within that area.
This is why we do have a lot of programs working with customer communities so that we can reduce the inflow and infiltration, which is if clean water can get into their pipes. Like, we try to actively work with them to make sure that our pipes are all sealed and it really is only sewage that goes into the pipes. But it's that metering system that helps us work with communities to get them engaged and trying to take that clean water out, because it could lower, or having leaky pipes can increase their rates overall. If a utility joins us, gets welcomed into a community, we will see that in our metering and alarm, and that the waste fee would go to the community as the bill. And again, we do not bill individual residents in the metro. We are a wholesaler, so we send that bill to a local government, and then they decide how to distribute that cost to their residents. And we are not part of that decision making either.
That's helpful. Thank you. I think we have one more question from a board member, Member Bauer-Kemper. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll disclose it's not a question, but before we transition into the public comment that you gestured toward, I wanted to thank everyone for the presentations today. Much gratitude to all of you for contributing to today's discussion, and to those who also contributed to part one that we had last month. And I include in that the public comments that we received and probably will yet receive this afternoon. Lots of concerns and compelling ideas are arising, and I have to admit that I probably can't quite keep up. But this has been really, really helpful. I am supportive of EQB continuing to engage this conversation and perhaps taking deliberate action to consider some of the pathways that have arisen and been suggested or gestured toward. As I zoom out a bit, I can't help but have noted a couple references in the discussion today to that AUAR process. And as I asked last time, I'm still very interested in the role that the EQB has in ensuring that RGUs are using AUARs appropriately. And that led me to revisit some of the statutes and rules, policies, the strategic planning that guide our work as a board and that establish clear commitments for us to ensure effective environmental review, to facilitate positive government-to-government relations between EQB and Native nations, and to ensure that public voices are included and considered in environmental discussions and decision-making. Those are some of the things that always jump out to me when I look at what the EQB is about. And when I think about the AUAR and our own kind of formal explanation of the AUAR process that we have on EQB materials, and if I'm understanding correctly, that future projects in an AUAR area may not require environmental review if they're deemed consistent with those scenarios in the AUAR, because AUARs typically don't contemplate actual projects. That process then wouldn't provide opportunities for Native nations or for the public to learn about projects and to have their voices included and considered in relation to those subsequent projects. So, and I have really appreciated today the discussion of various triggers that can arise, but that also may not arise to when established thresholds may be met or may not be met, that may or may not then kind of trigger environmental review. And so I continue to be curious and concerned about how AUARs are being deployed in the context, not just of data centers, but broadly, but it arises and is motivated by this discussion that we're having. And so I'm wondering if we as a board could ask ERIS, the Environmental Review Implementation Subcommittee, to take up some of those questions and give them meaningful consideration as a kind of follow-up to this conversation that we've been having, and then come back to the board with ideas that arise in relation to that. So that's something that I've been kind of stewing or marinating on today throughout this discussion, and I know that it's a bit of a tangent, but I would feel remiss if I didn't put it out there. So thank you, Chair, appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Member Bauerkemper, for those comments. I do think, we're going to probably have more discussion around all of those topics in the upcoming meetings. And I want to, unless Executive Director or Commissioner Stroman want to comment directly on that, I want to make sure the public comment doesn't get shortchanged or too rushed. So I think we should go to that unless either of you want to respond right away. And I know there'll be many more discussions of this over the coming meetings as well.
I'll just briefly say that looking at our AUAR guidance has been on our work plan. It's one of the things the ER team is working on, and I think we were already pondering bringing that to ARIS. So we can start there and kind of talk to you all about what we're seeing, what we're doing there, and see what else needs to happen, I think. So yeah, stay tuned.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Well, transitioning to public comment, first of all, I just want to very quickly flag for the board members that there were some additional public comments that came in after the meeting packet, and those have been sent out to you. So all the board members do have those latest public comments. And as we go now to public commenters, just a quick request. We'd like you to focus on giving input related to the board's role and authorities, the overall process of environmental review as opposed to specific projects. If there's a programmatic issue that you think the board should further explore or take action on, definitely you should let us know. And we'd like to commenters to stick to about 2 minutes per speaker. If your comments include questions, we may not be able to answer them today, but we'll certainly take note of them and get back to you. And we're going to start with anyone in the room, I think, that has signed up to comment. Jesse, do we have any of those folks?
Yes, Chair Martin, we have 2 people in the room that signed up for public comment. I forgot to write their names down before I handed them to Catherine, so I'm going to ask Catherine to call their names, if that's okay.
Yeah, why don't we start with Carol Overland, and then I think I see one commenter online. So normally what we do, we'd move to I believe it's Peg who's online, and then we'll come back to Alan who's here in the room, and then anyone else who's online who wants to comment. I think go ahead and start raising your hands. We can see how many folks we have. But
how do we do this?
Do you want to come up here?
Hello, I'm Carol Overland. I'm from Ardway, Minnesota, and thank you again for the opportunity to comment. There are programmatic issues, and I brought them up last time that I was here, but the AR is clearly being used in what I regard as a deceitful way. They're hiding the information, and as we heard in the presentations, decisions are being made without having the information needed to make the decision. And so when this is on the work plan for the EQB, well, we'll have to stay tuned. It's going to be way too late. I'm very concerned about that. And that the EQB, I would think, would have a role of, if AUAR does come in a request for it, before it's turned over to the RGU, that it should really be looked at and see if an AUR is appropriate. And if not, don't send it to them. And I'm not sure what the EQB role could be there, but I think that there should be some due diligence here. And the public is at a real disadvantage. Like, notice for the AUARs, for the Cannon Falls one, it wasn't even publicized on their website. So it was hidden in like a notice in the bottom of the paper. People don't participate. And then if they want to participate, they don't know how to do it. There's no way that people know that they can, like, petition for environmental review. They don't know that they can intervene in a local government's permitting process. They don't even know how to comment effectively. So, there's a real problem here with public participation. And then DNR water permit, I'll check into that later because I'm curious about public participation in that. So over and over, it's a lack of information, and things are going forward without having the information. I do want to comment on the PUC comments about that. They do have a large users docket that has started up, and the docket number is M-25-289. Excel has asked to do a separate tariff for energy use for large users, which is data centers. That's what they're looking at. And I think that the EQB should also be keeping an eye on that. And that is basically it. There should be a way for the EQB to require that these AUAR process be used properly. And that if it's not, do the due diligence. And if it looks like it's not, then don't let it go forward. Get it into serious environmental review. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Overland.
Thank you.
Appreciate those comments. I think we're going now to the one of the online public commenters. I forget who needs to unmute them. Is that you, Kayla or Steph?
Chair Martin will. We have Peg Fershong up here to comment. Peg, you should be able to unmute yourself and go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for all of the information today. It was very helpful. My name is Peg Fershong, and I am with CURE, which is an environmental nonprofit that works primarily in rural Minnesota, and we have been following data center work for over 2 years now. And I would just like to say that there was a lot of really good information, but I think what we all can agree is that this is really complex. And the thing I just want to elevate is the question I put in the chat is that what you're seeing in these proposals is direct water use, and these projects are extremely energy consumptive. So unless they're using renewable energy, which to my knowledge, none of them are, they're going to be using a significant amount of water to generate that energy. And what triggers you to tie those together so that we really know the footprint of water on these data center projects? I realize that they're going to a third-party vendor for that energy, but it's obviously going to increase their appropriation in order to provide the energy. Do they have to go through a process of review to tie it to the project? I really liked, the pre-application process that Jason talked about, but it doesn't ask where they're getting their energy for the project. And that might be useful information, especially board member Smith talked about modeling. And, if you have all these gaps in the information, if you have some of these tidbits, you can kind of put together a better idea of perhaps where the project's going. I would also like to say this. Most of the folks talking here are in the metro area, and the presentations from Met Council. There's a lot of capacity, technical capacity and expertise that comes with being in the metro area that rural Minnesota and rural municipalities and communities just don't have. There's not a consistency of access to engineers and hydrologists, and all of that's entailed to manage these complex projects. And so rural communities are at a real disadvantage in capacity to be able to evaluate these processes and projects for long-term use. So I did just want to mention that, and we'll probably submit a comment, but thank you for the opportunity today, and thank you for all the work.
Thanks very much, Ms. Fershong. Jesse, do we have another commenter in the room now?
Yeah, we're going to go to Alan Muller. Alan, do you want to come up here?
My name's Alan Muller. I reside in Red Wing. It's been quite some years since I've attended an EQB meeting. I don't see familiar faces particularly. I want to begin by offering you the thought that to ask members of the public to sit through a meeting of several hours and then to limit their comments to 2 minutes is not necessarily courteous or reasonable or suggestive that public engagement is something that the board is taking seriously. Second general thought, it seems to me that Minnesota overall devotes a lot of resources to the management of water resources. but their responsibility is divided among so many entities, so many levels of government, that nobody is really held responsible for the results. And if we look at the situation, we see that the vast majority of surface waters in Minnesota are in fact impaired for something or other. So it seems to me that the EQB, in a broader interpretation of its mission, ought to be looking at the big picture, not the small picture. Now, it is interesting that we have essentially a new industry in Minnesota, perhaps in scale, if not in detailed characteristics. These data centers are a big deal. However, all of the conversation that I have seen relating to impacts on water resources is that we're talking about non-contact cooling water, which is a subject that one can discuss at great length, and I don't intend to do that. But it is certainly possible to design projects using fairly large amounts of non-contact cooling water that aren't destructive or consumptive of water resources. Couple of questions here. One of the Met Council slides contained the statement, agreements are reached and project goes public, or something to that effect. And my question is there a significance to the order that's given here? That in fact, at least the Met Council and maybe others go public after the deals have been done? And if there's a response to that, I would appreciate it.
So Muller, I thank you for those comments. I want to make sure we get in any other public commenters. I see at least one other online, and I'm not sure how many others we have either in the room or online.
Okay, well, I'm almost done. The environmental review in Minnesota has kind of a long and complicated history. But if we look at 3 items, AUAR is obviously not a suitable framework for conducting environmental review of a particular project. Likewise, EAW, Environmental Assessment Worksheet, is intended as a screening tool to make a call about whether there should be environmental review. It's not conceived of, at least it wasn't in the original statute, conceived of as in and of itself environmental review. And it seems pretty obvious that the projects we're talking about here that have got the attention of people in this room and many other people call for an EIS. And that ought to be something that is established up front and not needing to be argued over or debated. I've been watching from some distance the environmental review in the form of an AUAR occurring in Cannon Falls. And it's quite clear that with all due respect to the officials of Cannon Falls, the integrity of their process has been compromised by the developers. And they don't know what they're doing. They don't have a clear sense of what they ought to be doing. And one sees increasing alienation of the residents of Cannon Falls from the government of Cannon Falls because this is not being handled well. And that being so, the EQB, in figuring out how to handle this sort of project, ought to keep a couple of things in mind. And these were mentioned by the gentleman from the Department of Health. But it ought to be done in a way that doesn't alienate the community, that doesn't produce a false response, an inaccurate response, an inaccurate or meaningless environmental review because the wrong framework was used for it.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Muller. We do have to move on to another public commenter. And that's someone online, I think, Sarah Meridian. Jesse, could you unmute Sarah?
Chair Martin, yes, we have Sarah Meridian and Meridian. Sarah, you should be okay to unmute and make a comment.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And you both said my last name absolutely correctly. So thank you. I'm Sarah Meridian, also with Cure. Just two quick things. As a point of clarity, to Mr. I believe it's Meckel, I'm so sorry if I mispronounced that, from the DNR. I believe I saw on your slide kind of this thought that the DNR will ensure that water efficiency measures are used by data centers. If that is what was on there, I just want it to be super clear to everybody that the law that was passed this year actually states that the DNR shall ensure that a data center has reasonably considered water efficiency measures. It does not require a data center to actually use any efficiency measures in practice. And the site for that, for those who are nerdy and want to know, is MnSTAT 103G.271 subdivision 5B. So to the extent we're relying on kind of that understanding of what's protecting Minnesota's waters, would just encourage you to check the law. And then, I really appreciate this discussion. It seems like there's still a lot of gaps in our collective knowledge. It would be helpful, I think, for the public to understand how agencies are filling these gaps. So if, it kind of sounded like, again, maybe we're not looking to other states and what data is there for water use, what are we relying on then? Is it just what a developer or a data center tells you? Is there existing expertise at the agencies on hyperscale data centers or specific technologies like cooling technologies that they're using? Or is there some sort of third-party assistance that agencies are seeking? For example, I know at last month's EQB meeting, a rep from Kimley Horn, which is one of the companies that has assisted data centers and developers on AUARs around the state, offered to provide their expertise to the state agencies in the EQB. So, is that the kind of expertise the state would consider using, or where is that kind of coming from? How are we filling those gaps would be really useful to know. So appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Meridian. Jesse or Catherine, I guess it is. Any other in the room or online?
Don't have any more in the room. Jesse, do you see any more online?
Chair Martin, that was the last hand online.
Great. Well, thank you, and I appreciate the comments from all the public commenters. We're just wrapping up here. Just before we adjourn, though, we wanted to go back to the board members. Any questions or thoughts after hearing the public comments?
I would I guess I'll make one quick comment. I would like to just note my interest as well in the public member comment of Met Council looking at when agreements are agreed to and when public is notified of the projects, right? I saw that too in that slide where, do you want to respond to that now or?
Yeah, please. Well, I guess if it's okay with the chair.
Yes, Mr. Chair, is it okay?
Yeah, please go ahead.
So yeah, actually, thank you for asking about that question. It means I need to do some work on my slides. So when we get to that step of environmental review, it is public when a project goes through environmental review, and we at the council are notified at the same time. So for the environmental review aspect and where it had the arrow that says the public then knows, it is because of the notice that the public is aware. So it is not because of agreements that the council has been trying to do in secret. For the will serve notice, that is through conversation with the developers indeed and those technical assistance folks. And so because they are trying to get their points in a row to apply for the environmental review, that is where everything that the council does is publicly transparent, but that process just as part of site design tends to be a little bit not as publicly exposed. So I hope that helps. And to that point, when we are doing project design, we also don't know who the developer is. We don't know much of anything. Usually those projects come in with code names like Polaris or Bigfoot or all of these different That's the job I want, just to put that out in the public. I want to be the code name maker. So that's where we don't have complete information either.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. And I think just the public in general, and me as well. It seems like a lot of this stuff, there's NDAs signed with local AUAR folks, right? People doing those AUARs and things like that. And so we're trying to suss out where these projects become real projects, when they become public, when decisions can be made, and especially when public can input their input into those projects.
Yeah, and to the point of trying to have transparency, that is why the council does not sign any NDA, so that all of our work is publicly available.
May I make a quick comment about that? Very short.
Mr. Chair, did you hear the request for an additional comment to be made from the room?
Yes, I mean, we are over time. Is this another public comment? I can't see who's asking.
Yes, it is. Ms. Overland wanted to add a comment.
Mostly, I just want to make sure everyone knows that Data Practices Act requests can be useful. I got information out of Cannon Falls before it was made public, and they were saying, oh, no, we know nothing, and not giving out information. But I got plans, specific plan through Data Practices Act request.
And I will just note, all of us together as state agencies, we're all subject to the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act, and that drives how we manage our data. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you so much. Well, we're a little over time and we've reached the end of our agenda. Any other business before we adjourn? Thank you again to the presenters for excellent presentations and to the board members and the public for very thoughtful questions. So hearing no other business, I think we're adjourned for today. Thank you so much to everyone.
Thank you.